Welcome back. You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Juliet Spare with today's discussion. As more wind farms are being planned and developed across the UK, I'm asking today, at what cost? Will Britain's economy benefit, or will the development of more turbines leave a legacy on the landscape, costing people their view? Joining me in the studio is Benny Peiser, Director of the Global Warming Policy Foundation, Adam Bell from Renewable UK, and on the telephone, MEP Derek Clark, and from the UK Independence Party and former teacher of physics and chemistry, and Dr. Doug Greenwell, researcher in flight dynamics at City University. How much renewable energy is produced currently by onshore wind farms in the UK? I'll come to you first, Adam Bell.
We have about 4.5 gigawatts of onshore wind produced currently installed in the UK. That operates at capacity factor of around 25 to 27%. So in any given year, several million households will be powered by onshore wind.
So how do we strike the balance then between the need for renewable energy and what households use, and the need to protect areas of outstanding natural beauty in the UK? I'll come to you, please, Derek Clark.
If you're talking about protecting areas of natural beauty, then you're right. The windmills are seen by most people to be a blot on the landscape. But that is a question of where you live, and can you see them from your window, or do you drive past them every day on the way to work or on the farm every day? My concern is not their visual aspect, but the fact that they're useless. They only produce electricity for around 30% of the time. That is the time for which the wind is blowing with anything like the right strength to produce current. 30% of the time is 120 days in the year. If you put it all together, that means 245 days in the year without any such energy. So what do we do then?
Adam Bell, they're useless.
I think, unfortunately, the gentleman has made a couple of common mistakes. First of all, it's not the case that people think wind turbines are a blot on the landscape. Recent polls have shown that a majority of the country, including a majority of rural dwellers, do find wind turbines visually acceptable. Secondly, this 30% figure, this isn't how wind turbines work. They'll produce energy around 80 to 90% of the time, but they won't always be operating at the maximum capacity. They can use lower wind speeds than their rated level just to make sure they are producing power. It's absolutely true to say that compared to their maximum possible output, they will produce, as I said, around 25 to 27% of the time onshore, more offshore. But it's not the case that they're only working 30% of the time.
Would you say then, Derek, that where you live in the East Midlands, that many people think they are an addition to the landscape, or that they are a blot on the landscape? I think Northamptonshire's been the wind farm capital of England.
Yeah, the local paper published a map a short while ago, and it's dotted over with windmill sites and projected windmill sites. I have been to three meetings, in Milton Keynes, in Northamptonshire where I live, and in Lincolnshire, where there's a great deal of projected wind farm capacity going up. Every single one of those meetings was protests by 100 people at least, who all live in the district. I'll give you the best quote, and that's a village of Wollaston near Wellingborough. And there were 100 people there from a small village protesting against the possibility of just two windmills being put up on a farmer's land adjacent to the village. They didn't want to see them. It spoiled their look, the view across the local countryside, and they're absolutely right. So wherever I go, I do meet people protesting about the visual aspect, not to say the thump, thump, thump noise they get continuously day and night, and for some people, the very, very distressing flicker effect, especially in sunlight, which can, a doctor assures me, lead to some quite severe mental conditions.
I'd like to come to Dr. Doug Greenwell, please, the researcher in flight dynamics at City University, London. Dr. Greenwell, what do you say in response to the accusation that they are useless, and the research suggested that people can suffer from the flickering effects of wind turbines?
Well, I think the charge of useless is over the top a bit. There are, they do have, obviously there are times when the wind levels are relatively low, but this is part of the planning in terms of how you use the output. Any power generating device is offline for significant times if the power stations fail or out for service. No one suggested that wind power is a 100% solution to our energy needs. It's part of an energy mix. offshore, to be honest, I believe offshore is a better place to put it. You do get a more constant wind, you get better use out of them. But to say something is useless because there are times of the year when it's not available, it's something you could apply to almost any power generation system. You need to look at it as part of an energy mix. In terms of impact on the environment, for example, flicker, this is something that's taken into account when you design wind farms in the first place. It is a requirement to look at turbine shadows, where the shadows fall, how flicker affects houses, and wind farms are designed around this. Turbines have to be moved to make sure that the shadows are not falling across particular houses. So this is something that is well known and is taken account of in the design of a wind farm. I've never heard anything about mental issues. The flicker is perhaps the discomfort more than anything else. Similarly with noise. Noise levels are something that wind turbines have got much quieter over the last few years. The technology has really advanced. Noise levels are very small, particularly once you've moved a reasonable distance away from them. All these things, you've got to put them into perspective. You've got to compare them with, for example, noise from if you were living next to a normal power station, noise from the transport of fuel in and out into that power station, road noise, for example.
I'd like to just bring in Benny Peiser, the director from the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Benny, what do you say in response to this? He suggests that it's not just wind, we need to have obviously all alternative energies, and the MEP suggests they're useless, and obviously that's contested by Adam Bell there.
Well, our main concern is the economic impact wind energy has on households and on industry in this country. As a direct result of renewable energy generation, energy prices tend to go up because renewables are more expensive than conventional forms of energy. So there is a limit to what households are prepared to accept. People are quite happy to support renewables if it doesn't hurt them too much. They're happy to pay a certain price, but there's a level at which people will become very critical, and I think we are reaching a level where there's a public backlash, also a political backlash, because industries are threatened by ever-increasing energy prices. Now, obviously, only a portion of the rise of energy prices are due to renewables, but that is going to grow. Currently, I think it's somewhere between 7 or 8% of energy bills, but it's expected to potentially double that proportion. So there is a real threat to households and UK competitiveness if the renewable energy policy will lead to ever-increasing energy prices. That is our main concern. And that, I think, will have to be is also because a lot of countries are now cutting back on the subsidies and the feed-in tariffs for the renewables, including this government. But in all over Europe, it's becoming more and more obvious that it's far too costly, that the estimates were on the low side, and so governments are becoming increasingly concerned.
The Energy and Climate Change Secretary Ed Davey was reportedly said to say that wind power provides secure low-carbon power to homes and business and supports jobs and brings significant investment. And Chair of the Environment Select Committee says Britain risks the lights going out if the government fails to act quickly on energy issues. You disagree?
Well, fortunately, something else is happening in the energy sector, and that is the shale gas revolution, particularly in North America, but potentially also in Britain. This threat that the lights will go out, I mean, everyone uses this kind of scaremongering. There is absolutely no shortage of energy in the energy markets. You can buy energy left, right, and center. There is absolutely no shortage. The big issue is you have vested interest on all sides, and they are shouting from the rooftop that their solution is the best, their energy is the best. What we need is a very cool and rational crunching of figures and a very rational assessment of what is best for this country and what is best for families in this country. That has to be the priority.
So you're coming from a economic and sociological perspective, what about an environmental perspective? How much research is done to see what effects that the wind farms have on the other environment around it? I know there's a recent research by a university in New York that studied a wind farm in Texas, and it found that the local area temperature rose by almost a degree in the nighttime. What research is actually being carried out, Adam?
Oh, well, there's a couple of things there. First of all, on the particular study you're talking about, it's absolutely true. That's because obviously the turbine blades go around, they churn up the air, they move warmer air from closer to the ground and put where colder air would have been in the night. So effectively redistributing the heat around the turbine, which produces, of course, a local warming effect. But I'm sure Derek would agree, as someone who taught physics, something that rearranges the place of energy within the system doesn't add energy to a system. It's not adding anything to global warming. Secondly, in terms of environmental impacts, there was a recent study carried out by a variety of organisations on the impact that wind turbines have on birds. I think it's a common misnomer that wind turbines have a strong negative impact upon bird populations. This study looked at a range of common bird types, looked at the places where they nest, looked at the sorts of populations they had, and found out the impact of wind turbines on birds was minimal. In some cases, it almost helped them thrive by moving away other forms of competition.
So are you saying where people live and what they look at shouldn't really be taken into consideration when we look at the wider issue of renewable energy and where we put wind farms? But I'd like to come to you, Derek Clark, and then next to you, Adam.
I'm not so concerned about the visual aspect and the flicker effects and so on. I know I mentioned it. I was just relaying some people's concerns and actual experience. But the point is, these wind farms just do not produce the energy that's claimed. It's a false statement to say that they're turning a lot of the time. They may be, but they're not producing much energy.
Okay, Adam Bell, you must respond to that. They're not producing enough energy. So what's the point of wind farms?
Modern turbines cut in about 4 metres per second. They reach maximum capacity around 10 to 13 metres per second. They cut out around 25 metres per second, but that corresponds to wind speeds of about 60 miles an hour. It's a really strong wind, which doesn't happen often. Now, I think what's interesting is to go back to Benny's point about the economics of this. And I would absolutely agree that when we're deciding where we get our future energy supplies from, we do need to do the numbers. We do need to look at what's going to deliver for the UK. Now, DEC came out with a report yesterday which said that investment in onshore wind was around, I think, 584 million, while the cost for support for that in terms of the renewables obligation was around 350 million. It clearly is generating a return for the UK for the money we're investing in it. I would say that Derek is absolutely right as well. We are shutting down a lot of our old power stations. We need to make decisions now about where we're going to get that new capacity from. And quite frankly, given that a lot of them are closing this decade, our options are pretty limited. You're looking effectively choosing between just gas and a mixture of gas and wind. Now, it's certainly the case that the shale gas advocates will tell you that it's going to come along and save us all by providing us with limitless cheap energy. Unfortunately, it's not the case. It's going to be more expensive here in the UK compared to the US. We have more regulations. We have a stronger history of environmental protection. It's not going to impact on the cost case for wind. Bloomberg New Energy Finance have said that even with a significant amount of new gas in the system, onshore wind will be the cheapest form of energy, cost competitive certainly, by towards the end of this decade.
But who stands to gain the most from developing the onshore wind farms?
Well, if it were so cheap, we wouldn't have a big political row. The government is increasingly realizing that this is a big liability. There's a big political row now going on where an increasing number of conservative MPs who've written almost in the hundreds to the Prime Minister saying this is damaging our economy, it's damaging families. So in purely economic terms, the people resent paying the poor people, the ordinary households, paying big landowners who can afford to invest millions in wind turbines on their land. And it's a wealth transfer from poor and average households to the very rich. That in itself is politically unsustainable. It's unsustainable because if it's so cheap, there should not be any households paying for it. The investors should pay for it, and there should be no one family having to pay higher electricity bills as an indirect subsidy. So I'm not sure if it were so cheap, we wouldn't have to pay hundreds and hundreds of millions in subsidies to the landowners.
Adam?
Well, just to talk through a couple of numbers. The actual cost to the average householder for support for onshore wind is about 2 pence a day. It's not an enormous amount. And as I said earlier on, we're getting a return of investment of something like 40% a year on what we're paying out. I absolutely understand what Benny's saying, though, about impacts upon poorer households. And I think what you have to do, especially when you're looking at energy, as the gentleman said at the start, you have to look at it in the context of your entire energy mix and your entire policy mix as well. There is an obligation upon the utilities to supply insulation and various other energy-saving products to the poorest households in the country to make sure that rising energy prices impact them as little as possible. That's certainly, of course, something that we would support.
So, Dr. Doug Greenwell, how soon is the wind farm renewable energy coming into the poorer households in the UK?
In terms of households, energy is energy. It comes in, they pay for it. The economic argument is always a tricky one because the numbers depend on who's doing the sums. In terms of things like subsidies, looking at subsidies for nuclear power. As far as an energy consumer is concerned, they're buying energy in, so it's the price of that. I don't think the individual consumer really sees very much of where it comes from. So the economic argument from the point of view of the consumer isn't that strong because it's swamped by things like variations in gas prices, variations in all the other energy prices. A lot of it is political. There's a political decision about long-term futures. I find the argument that investment in wind power is damaging the UK economy is frankly quite bizarre, really, when the numbers are so small. In terms of, I guess, are you looking at the impact on people's houses, on people's local environment? Certainly people will not be doing wind turbines in their local areas. It's not an efficient way of doing things. As far as a consumer is concerned, what they'll see is long-term sustainability, long-term stability, a future for their children in 50 or 100 years' time.
But does that come at a cost of what it looks like on the landscape? Obviously, Derek Clark, where do you stand on this? I mean, would you support the poorer households in your constituency and try and encourage them to adopt a cleaner or more renewable and therefore cheaper energy?
As I say, everybody has a vote and everybody's point of view should be recognised. As regards the cost in the subsidy on land-based wind farms, yeah, it may only work out to a few pence a year per each, but that's not the point. The point is the landowners are reaping vast rewards, thousands of pounds a year, for doing nothing, for just signing a piece of paper to have a wind farm put on their land. And of course that then leads to a collection of such landowners exerting a lobby effect, which is where the politics comes in, as the last speaker mentioned. You get a lobby effect of all these landowners together, and they are promoting behind the scenes the installation of wind farms because they and their moneyed friends are then getting enormous subsidies for which, frankly, they haven't earned. And that's what makes the ordinary person angry. It may only work out to 4 or 5 pence per whatever, but that isn't the point. They see all this money going to these people who then exert a lobby to increase the number of wind farms.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London with me, Juliet Spare, and we're talking about renewable energy and in particular wind farms. Joining me in the studio is Benny Peiser, Director of the Global Warming Policy Foundation, Adam Bell from Renewable UK, and on the telephone, MEP Derek Clark from the UK Independence Party, and Dr. Doug Greenwell, researcher in flight dynamics at City University in London. Is Britain lagging behind other countries then in terms of adopting renewable energy? Are we really fighting a losing battle because of protesters and lobby groups and people like the Campaign for Rural England who have said, no more, we are going to campaign to stop these turbines being built? Adam Bell?
I think it's certainly the case that it's been difficult to build onshore wind turbines. In England, the approval rate at the local planning committee stage is only about 25%. It is by no means easy to build them. But at the same time, we are starting to make progress. Just today, the announcement came out that the largest wind farm in England and Wales has just been consented. And it's the Pennycumwade project near Swansea for 76 turbines, which will have a capacity of 299 megawatts. It's a big project. Where we do have a lead, though, and lead we have an opportunity to capitalise on in terms of generating a supply chain and all the jobs that come with it, is offshore wind. We have more offshore wind turbines installed than any other country in the world. This is an exciting opportunity for us. A lot of companies are interested in coming here to build these turbines, and they're looking at areas along the east coast and on the west coast, in old industrial areas, old port areas, where they do desperately need this sort of investment.
Europe has, for the last 20 years, pushed renewables to the top of the energy agenda. Europe now is running out of money. And in country after country, all these very nice-looking schemes, which are expensive, are being cut down, slice by slice, and rolled back. And this country is already phasing out solar subsidies. It is phasing out subsidies for onshore wind farms. At least that's the promise the Prime Minister has given, that enough is enough, and they have been far too expensive. He said that. So people are expecting that we won't see the boom that many people expected a few years ago. This will be rolled back rather than expanded. Given the current economic crisis in Europe, it's inevitable that every country will look at the cheapest possible opportunity to make industries competitive with the rest of the world. Let's not forget that no one else in the world is as obsessed with these targets as Europe. Most countries don't have these targets, and most countries are looking at being economically competitive in a growing global economy, and Europe is falling back, and that is the key problem.
So, just before I come to you, Adam, Derek Clark, you must be pleased to hear what Benny Peiser has just said. Would you agree with it?
Of course I do, and I've agreed with several things that people have said, but I do return to the basic point. Because the wind is variable, conventional power stations, coal, gas, whatever, have to be kept going online. You can't suddenly start them up when the wind drops. They've got to be there spinning ready, in spinning reserve they call it, to be switched into the grid at literally a second's notice. Now that means they're burning fossil fuels, most of them. For producing a gigawatt in a year, a direct coal-fired power station turns out around 10.8 tons of carbon dioxide. When it's used as a balancing partner, keeping wind turbines viable and going, it's still turning out 7.5 tons of CO2 per year. It's only saved around a quarter of its CO2 output. And that's infinitesimal when you consider that power consumption is going up all the time. I'm sorry, it's a figment of imagination that the wind turbines reduce CO2 significantly. They don't.
Adam Bell, to come back to you, obviously in reaction to Bunny and then obviously Derek there. Useless, new trend, just to sort of keep up with targets in Europe. Why are wind farms so good?
Right, well, first of all, it's not the case that Europe's turning its back on wind. Denmark's aiming to get 50% of its electricity from wind by 2030. Germany's expanding its wind portfolio. France is going for offshore in a big way. The Chinese have more wind turbines installed than any other country on the planet. Brazil's doing the same thing. A lot of the world is looking at wind and going, we've got lots of open land, we've got a big resource here, the cost of this is coming down, let's get in the game while we still can. On Derek's point, I hate to say, Derek, you've misunderstood how the grid works in the UK. You've got a lot of power plants operating at once, and the output of those plants varies by about 20 gigawatts over the course of a day, from at night when no one's using electricity to during the day when they're using a lot, and that variance already happens in our system. We don't just have one coal plant balancing wind. We have lots varying a little. And our expertise in predicting wind output has increased significantly over the last 10 years. National Grid can now predict within a margin of accuracy of something along the lines of 5 to 10% what the wind will be in about 4 hours' time. That allows you to very, very slowly vary the output of a large number of power stations, making sure that we get the maximum amount of carbon savings we can, making sure we save as much fossil fuel as we possibly can, fossil fuel that we otherwise would have had to pay for.
OK, so if I'd like to just end then with Derek Clark, a last word from you. What would your message be to your constituents in Northamptonshire and possibly to David Cameron in the prospect of more wind farms being erected in the UK?
I say no, for all the reasons I've given, and I've heard what these gentlemen say, and I know they're experts, but the point remains that conventional power stations have still got to be there, churning out CO2 uselessly when the wind is strong, and then cut themselves down when they, of course, are then working at their most inefficient stop-go, like a motor car in town traffic. One final point, somebody mentioned Denmark. Yes, they are one of the biggest users of wind farms. You might like to know that they're also one of the biggest producers. In fact, I think in the European scene, they're the biggest manufacturers of wind turbines. But they're having to come out of the market now because their capacity has fallen. And it's the Chinese who are going to pick that up. And so we're going to have to be importing stuff, these wind turbines, from China now. And that doesn't exactly help the balance of payments, does it?
Dr. Greenwell, what's your response to that? Will we be producing or importing the wind turbines from China? And how efficient are the ones that are currently being manufactured here for the UK wind farms?
Well, I think where they come from, to a certain extent, is irrelevant. We could have been building them in the UK if we'd invested in the R&D programme back in the 70s. There are, at this point, very highly developed, very efficient bits of machinery from the technical point of view, extremely good. Technology, obviously, still developments in there, but they're very highly developed. So in terms of their efficiency, there's not a lot more you can get out of the efficiency of an individual wind turbine. You're down to things like positioning, operational aspects for it.
Derek Clark says they're useless. Dr. Doug Greenwell says you can't get anything more efficient. Final word from you, Benny Peiser. He says it all comes down to politics.
Yeah, I think he's right. And as we have seen in recent weeks and months, politics is changing radically. In this country, it is changing. The mood is changing. And as the economy struggles, people's priorities change as well. And I think that will focus people's mind. Wind is the least of people's concerns if you're not a landowner. And so therefore it will drop from the political agenda more and more. And this government might regard it as a liability.
Will renewable energy like wind farms be regarded as a liability, Adam?
I think we have an opportunity to build a world-beating industry in offshore wind. We have an opportunity to generate tens of thousands of jobs right and need them the most. Unlock investment that right now is just not coming forward in the global economic downturn. One of the things I would say as well is that wind turbine blades are, anything up to 50 meters in length. People aren't going to import those from China. That's a big thing to import from China. There are things you need to make here, and that's certainly, wind turbines are certainly going to be one of them.
I'd like to end now by thanking all of my guests for joining me, Juliet Spare, on The Voice of Russia in London. Stay tuned for the news.